Hi, everybody. Thanks for your time today. I'm Neha, and I have Shubham with me, who's the other co-founder. Okay, he's the other. I would love to talk about, revisiting all the different kinds of testing models. Have you ever come across testing pyramid? If you can raise your hand, if you know about testing pyramid, or honeycomb model, or different kinds of shapes that we speak about while SDLC testing. Okay, great. I see a lot of hands. That's good. So I have a question. If anybody here can just answer or think around, why do we test? Why do you test? Is it because the boss said so, or is it's just my job, or is it really to find regressions? Anybody? Let's make it a casual conversation because I'm not here to preach something about something. So, anybody wants to talk about it? No? Yeah, to maintain the delivery of the product quality. Yeah. Confidence to ship, yes, definitely. Yeah, because we want to be ensuring that we're not breaking any flows to our customers. That brings their confidence with us, right? So that's why we definitely had testing in place. But let's go back and think about why was testing even introduced, even the testing pyramid introduced. Um, Okay, how do I change? Yeah. So, it started back in 1978 when, Panzer mentioned in his paper, Automatic Software Test Drivers, that he noticed some mentions of unit testing in the IBM internal books. And, and there was no pyramid, there was nothing around integration test or API test, but people wanted to just unit test, and unit test had a meaning, uh, two meanings, which now I believe have diverted in how we look at unit test. One, you know, a single piece of code being executed while you are testing, and the other, a single unit being tested of the system. Now, unit could be very subjective to who is testing and what that person is testing, right? So, the term unit test could be inferred in these two different ways when initially the unit testing term was coined. And then, in 1979, there was in early 1990s, there were a lot of mentions by the extreme programming community. Ken Beck was driving that back then. And unit testing was still not evolved into integration or API testing. There was no testing pyramid still, but people mention that it is a modular testing. Now, whatever was mentioned as a unit, now people were also inferring to modules. There are two different types of testing they want to infer. We mentioned about two inferences, right? One is unit as a code, and one is unit in the system. So one is unit and one is module testing. That's how people just tried to test and automate and made sense around how we can test the systems. In 2004 and in 2000s, um, have you heard of Selenium? Yeah, founder of Selenium, Jason Huggins. He met Martin Fowler on a flight, and they were just brainstorming around, okay, how do we make it like a framework that people can follow, and they came up with a testing pyramid. That was something. That's the first drawing. In fact, on the next slide, I have another one. So this term was coined, this testing pyramid was coined keeping in mind that, yeah, this is what Jason Huggins drew and explained by Martin Fowler in his terms that the upper level of the test cases are very expensive to write. They're very slow to write. I think we'll all know about it. But if it is possible to make them very quick to write or execute, nothing like it, because they test the business logic of it. Unit tests are faster to write, but they test the simpler logic of the code base. So if we have a framework or a provision to configure the unit or the service level the UI or the service level test cases, nothing like it. Like if it can be done in a very easy, simple, cheaper way. I think we all agree to it, and that's what we know about the testing pyramid. But when companies started adopting this, what happened? So there was this notion that the service layer can be divided into multiple three components. The component test, integration, and then the API test. And there, this is the cloud of manual testing. Anybody, if they want to share why is this cloud there, if anybody has read about this, why that manual testing cloud appeared on the testing pyramid? No? Okay, I'll get to it. It appeared because no matter if you are doing unit test, system test, API test, UI test, you cannot write 100% of the automation. And you still needed to do a lot of manual testing at each layer of what you are trying to automate. And eventually, when companies started adopting this testing pyramid, there was initially they failed to set up the culture of unit test being written and adopted, like to let's say 80-90% of the coverage. And what happened, the executives and the management asked testing teams or the QA teams to focus on the API test or the business level test, and there was a lot of pressure because there was no unit testing done at all, no testing done at all, although we are trying to follow the pyramid structure. So that created the pressure on the testing teams to, quickly validate what we are going to do on the business logic front if there are any regressions. But these are very expensive to write. So how can they quickly, let's say if you get 2 weeks to test your APIs on every feature, can you do that? Probably not. So this is called an ice cream or a melting cone because that pressure was, creating the delusion of testing teams failing to automate the testing. But in actuality, we failed to implement the testing pyramid from the bottom of the pyramid. This is one way of seeing how people visualize test cases. So there are technology-facing test cases, which could be focusing towards supporting the programming. Now, these are today I think we call them TDD test cases in some manner. These are the test cases which you may write before even writing code. And the purpose is to discover all the test cases that I want to write my code for and I want to cover it for. On the other hand, we have the test cases or the automation suites which will be critiquing the product. By critiquing the product, I mean, there could be, you're writing test cases to ensure there is no failing user case. You're trying to critique the product that is already developed. You're trying to find bugs. So you can automate, you can write technology-facing test cases for both the cases. That is more like BDD, what we call today. Now, when you're implementing, you don't really need to think what shape or model do I need to implement as a framework? What you need to think is what kind of risk do I need to mitigate when I'm writing my test cases? Now, for everybody, it could be a different type of application or use case. For some people who have complex business logic written inside functions, unit testing could be the only go-to way. For the others, their application might be dependent on the other systems, and integrations matter the most. So for them, integration and the higher level test cases matter the most. So there is no role framework that everybody needs to stick to. What we need to balance out is what do I automate and balance my risk according to the effort that I can put to automate my test case. So that's basically, you don't really need to follow Q1, Q2, Q3, and Q4, but it's just to, mention that Q1 is technology-facing test cases that are supporting the team or the code base. And Q4 is we will first focus on technology-facing test cases, which are critiquing the product. So when you're deciding internally, even if the, let's say, QE is deciding with their CPTO or their managers, what do we need to focus first on when we get a release or when we get a feature? Do we write the test cases first, or for the upcoming feature being developed, or do we focus on critiquing the product by preparing a test automation suite, irrespective of understanding how the code base would be or what is the business logic? Okay. So in, I think, 2018, in 2018, Spotify released this that they have a lot of microservices. The microservices culture got in. And they mentioned how they are able to quickly test their microservices and be confident of the quality that they are shipping. So what they mentioned was simple. They're doing most of the test cases on the integration front. They're not doing integrated or implementation detailed test cases. So implementation detailed test cases are the unit test cases. Integrated test cases you can consider like API test cases, which depend on the other system. So if you execute your test case and it depends on the other system, then it's an integrated test case, and it would majorly fail because your other system needs to be, it's the dependency. They need to be there in place when you are executing your integration test. So they mentioned that they do most of the test cases as integration test case because, those test cases can be executed in isolation, and they do not need to depend on setting up different dependencies or application services. So I can test my application in isolation and be confident on my application has not broken or the features exposes and has not broken. This diamond model quickly got validated and also adopted by community, and they extended, especially Kenzie Rhodes in 2018 mentioned that we can also add a static layer, static check, that will reduce the need of having the unit test cases in place, even further. So we write a good layer of, we have, compilers and static checkers. After that layer, we don't really need the unit test cases, only for the complex functions. And then a good layer of integration test, which can test my service in isolation, the business logic, and I don't need to depend on setting up the environment. And then, very few, probably none, of the API end-to-end test cases, which will execute in a real environment which is dependent on other dependencies. So, it's just another way of representing. Since I have less time, I'll just move on. But in one line, this slide wants to show that if it is simpler to test a code base or a use case, it is easier and cheaper to write that test case. But as you go up, it will become difficult to test or write a test case, but you will be testing a bigger business problem at the end of the day. So when Martin Fowler read all about testing pyramid being evolved to these different shapes, he mentioned that I was technically talking about the same thing. It's the testing pyramid. It's just that people have interpreted unit testing layer in a different manner. And they make different shapes like testing trophy, diamond, and all. He also tried to mean the same thing and categorize the unit test in sociable and solitary test, where sociable test is more like the integrated test in the Spotify model, and solitary test is more like the integration test in the Spotify model. Integrated and integration test. I'll skip this. Now, have you tried using GenAI for test generation? It worked. For how many people it didn't work? Like, were you happy with the GenAI being used? You tried creating test cases and it was amazing. It automated everything. Perfectly fine. I observe the similar behavior. If you give some resources to the model, it will definitely pick up something and generate some good thing. So the model needs the context, as simple as that. But who has that context, like a lot of context to generate the perfectly accurate test cases that does not hallucinate, right? So there are certain limitations up to which GenAI is not able to make it. But I believe in this GenAI era, we're coming to the AI glasses model where most of the unit test cases GenAI is able to cover. You use ChatGPT, Gemini, you will be able to get to 70-80% coverage. Similarly, like he mentioned, if you provide good context, you will be able to generate different scenarios, your API test scenarios. It is very good in the PNCs. But if you want to isolate your application and generate all the test cases for which the LLM needs a lot of context, like what are the other services your application talk to, what are the dependencies. Yeah, I'll just finish in 2 minutes. So there, AI is not there yet. And I'm not sure if it is going to be there. So that's why it's like an hourglass or a glasses shape. Yeah. Definitely. So if we have good context, like AI is able to really think of multiple edge cases. But what it's not good at currently, correct me if I'm wrong, to understand what all connections my application would make to other services, and how do I mock all of that data, or preparing the test case that will exactly mock out the environment surrounding my service. Basically, I'm talking about the integration layer. So, to me, unit test cases and API test cases very well covered with GenAI even today. But for integration test, which most of the models talked about that we should focus on, there still, Gen AI needs to cover up a bit. How we can solve it, I have a concept, but I think we don't have time. And I'll skip this, but I'll take any questions if you have. Can we take questions? Okay. No questions? Okay. Perfect. Thank you for your time. Okay, there's somebody who has a question. Okay. So, according to me, like this is what we built Keploy for as well, that if you are having an application and if you could have a proxy or something that will capture everything outgoing or incoming to an application, like database calls or other services, if you can capture that, you basically can test your application in isolation. So a proxy that can record everything, all the API calls, the databases, everything, and when you're replaying on a new version of the application, then you mock the environment exactly and you can understand what the new version of my application is giving out back. So you understand what is the exact regression that my application has.
Thank you, Neha.
Thanks, Deepak. I'm so
Big round,
sorry for taking more time.
it's
And
okay.
thank you, everybody, for
Big
your
round of
time.
applause to Neha. Thank you.